Hi friends, welcome to chapter 10, the beginning and the ending of a speech. So in this presentation, I am going to invite you to think about bookends. And, our bookends hold together this world of knowledge, the books in between. And so much like our speeches, the beginning and the ending will function as the bookends to our presentations. So one of the many mistakes that I often see with public speakers or presentations is the lack of attention devoted to a solid introduction and also the conclusion. So most often in public speaking classes such as this, students really undermine the importance of the introduction, but most importantly, they undermine oftentimes the conclusion. And so when students arrive to their conclusion, they really don't know how to conclude their presentation, and oftentimes the whole entire speech is ruined just because of a floppy or ineffective conclusion. So we are going to spend this presentation discussing what goes in the beginning, how to start our speeches, and the ending, how we should conclude our speeches, and what should we include in the ending of our presentation. So in this chapter, some of the objectives that we will be looking at are the four objectives of a speech introduction. So there's four main reasons why we include an introduction. Methods for gaining audience attention. So this is oftentimes the very first step that we are confronted with in the introduction, how to gain the attention of the audience. How do we invite them into our topic? And then the third objective of this chapter is the functions of a speech conclusion. So what does a conclusion do for us and our presentation? And then we'll briefly discuss on methods we can use for the conclusion. So let me go ahead and remind you of the very first presentation, which I covered the introduction of public speaking. And towards the end of that presentation, I posed a question: what makes a good speech? And so I offered three important critical elements that makes up a good speech. And the very first one is developing good ideas, having those great ideas. And so we do this by topic selection, brainstorming, researching, developing our general and specific purpose statements, outlining, editing, practicing, going back, re-editing if something doesn't work as well. So this is developing good ideas is an extensive process. Most of the time you're going to spend majority of your speech preparation time developing your actual speech. And so we've already touched on some of these concepts in previous chapters and some of the previous units where we talked about how to select a topic. What are some of the brainstorming methods we can use, how to research, how to find credible information so that we can inform ourselves on our topic. And then we will start looking at outlining, how to outline that information in a way that flows, that we can remember, and that will enhance the overall structure. So good structure is the second critical element of a good speech. And this is pertaining to developing the introduction, the body, and the conclusion, transition statements, all of those mechanical things that we need to include in a presentation. It also includes using the organizational patterns we recently learned about. And this could be topical organizational patterns, a sequential organizational pattern, a spatial organizational pattern, chronological. It could be causal, so these are typically for persuasive speeches. We use the cause, the effect, and the solution, or problem solution, those types of organizational patterns. And then the third critical element of a effective speech or good speech is having good delivery. And that is essentially developing a dynamic presentation, which includes vocal variety, fluctuating our voice to communicate emotion. It includes eye contact, looking directly at the audience to establish a bond with them. It also includes confident body posture. So this is, how we communicate through our body. So, are we communicating confidence to our audience? Are we using facial expressions to, again, communicate emotion? So these are the three important things that we need to consider when we're developing a presentation or speech. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on that second critical component, and that is good structure. So we will continue our discussion on good structure by really focusing on the introduction and the conclusion. So what is the purpose of an introduction, and what are some of the objectives of the introduction? Well, an effective introduction sets the tone for the rest of the speech. It also captures the attention of the audience and consequently invites the audience to listen to our presentations. Again, we learned about the psychology of the audience, and oftentimes it's our responsibility as speakers to really capture their attention and bring them into the conversation, into our speech, into our presentation. They aren't compelled oftentimes to listen. And we know that oftentimes as an audience member, we're often very distracted, or we have a short attention span. So really trying to pay attention to maybe a 6-minute or a 20-minute lecture tends to be very difficult for most people. And so we need to keep it engaging. One way we keep it engaging or keep the audience attention is to develop good structure in our speeches. So this will help us stay organized in our own presentations, but it'll also keep the audience members engaged and organized as they're trying to follow along our speech. And so the four really main objectives of an introduction is to gain the attention and the interest of the audience. It's designed to reveal the topic. It also should establish credibility and goodwill. And then lastly, it should preview the body of the speech, like reveal the main points that a speaker will be discussing. So these are the four broad objectives of a introduction. What I'm going to do is actually suggest you include 5 steps in the introduction. This is a proven effective method for developing an introduction. Now, it can seem a little bit awkward when you try implementing this for the first few times, but with anything with practice, it becomes easier and it becomes almost intuitive. And so the 5 steps that we should include in the introduction, and these are the 5 steps that I'm going to have you include in your speeches, specifically for the informative speech. We'll talk about the introduction for persuasive speech because there's 6 steps in that. But right now, the introduction for an informative speech should include the attention grabber. That's what I call it. Some people call it the hook. Some people call it the attention getter. Whatever you want to call it, that's fine. But the very first step that we want to do is capture the audience's attention. Now, the reason why this is important is because oftentimes, even before a speaker starts their speech, the audience is already judging the speaker based on their appearance, based on how they're conducting themselves. They're already judging the speaker and determining whether or not they want to listen or not. So, we have as speakers, we have a very limited window of opportunity to capture the attention of the audience. And so that's the very first thing. So after you've captured the attention of the audience, so as an audience member, they might be like, okay, I'm intrigued, impress me, right? The next thing that they're going to probably be wondering is, well, why are you here in the first place? Why are you talking to us? Like, okay, you captured my attention, but why are you here? And so the second step we want to do in the introduction is provide them with a purpose statement. And this is where we might say something like, I'm here today to inform you about X, Y, and Z, right? Or I'm here to persuade you to, I don't know, go out and vote. So this is where you're essentially addressing that question of, why am I, to the audience. You're addressing that question the audience members might have, and that is, why am I listening to this presentation? The third step is what I call the significance statement. And so, okay, so you've captured the attention of the audience. You've revealed to them what your topic is. Now, the next thing that an audience member might be thinking is, why is this important to me? Like, how is it relevant to me? Or, what are the broader implications of this? And this is really your opportunity as a speaker to convince the audience of why this topic is significant to them and why they should pay attention or invest their time into listening to your message. So that is the third step, the significance statement. What is the significance of your topic? Now, the fourth step is what I call the credibility statement. And so, okay, your audience members, they're intrigued by your attention grabber. They know the topic of your speech. They know why it's important. But the next question they're going to probably be asking themselves is, well, what gives you the authority to talk to me about this topic? And this is really our opportunity to showcase our credibility, to say, look, I have these experiences. I have these personal experiences, or I have this credential, or I have, I've dedicated the last 15 years studying communication studies. I have working towards a PhD, right? So this is where we really showcase our credibility so that we can communicate to the audience like, yes, you can trust me with this knowledge that I'm about to present to you. And then the last step is the preview statement. And this is where essentially we communicate our main points to the audience. We simply might say, first I'm going to discuss the importance of an introduction. Second, I will discuss the different types of introductions we can use. And third, I will talk about some best practices in developing an introduction, right? So this is essentially where we preview our body. We communicate to the audience. These are the main points I'm going to be talking about. So these are the 5 steps in the introduction. Let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper and go through each step and talk about some of the things we can use to accomplish these 5 steps in the introduction. So gaining the attention. The attention grabber is the very first thing that we do. How do we do that? Well, we could relate the topic to the audience. We could reveal how the topic is relevant to the audience. So you might come out in your presentation out on stage and you might say something like, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. All of us here are college students. All of us here are affiliated with the Institute, right? So there you go. You could, state the obvious or relate the topic to the audience. You could also state the importance of the topic. This is something that you're already going to do with the significance statement, but essentially you could address why the audience should care. You could startle the audience. Now, this doesn't mean, go up there and scream in the microphone to wake everyone up or to scare them. But you could use startling statistics or shocking statements. When I took public speaking back in the day, I remember one of my speeches I talked about, it was an informative speech, and I was talking about, what was his name? It was the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, Joseph Kony. And for some of us who are a little bit older, we probably can remember the nonprofit organization, The Invisible Children. And so when I took public speaking, that was in the media a lot. And so essentially what you did, or what was taking place in Uganda, is you had this de facto general from the military start his own army because he had this vision, and he was trying to capture power, and he was just not a good guy and spreading a lot of violence. But the shocking part is he was abducting children from their own homes and their own families, and essentially forcing them to fight in his army. We're talking about 8-year-olds running around with AK-47s, engaging in warfare. And so this was my topic. I was informing the audience about the gravity of the situation. And so for the attention grabber, I used a shocking statement. It was more of like a hypothetical shocking statement. So I asked the audience, I said, I want you to remember your life as an 8-year-old. Think about the things you were doing as an 8-year-old. And I paused and let the audience kind of ponder, that question, to reflect back on their memories. And then I said something to the effect, imagine being taken from your home with a gun pointed at your face and given the ultimatum to kill or be killed. That is the reality that children are facing in Uganda currently, right? And so it, starts out light, and then boom, I shocked them with that. Could you imagine as an 8-year-old giving that choice? Like, you're either going to die now, or you can join us and, kill someone else. That is the gravity of the situation. And so when approaching the attention grabber, we could use startling statistics. One of my previous students, she talked about child abduction or human trafficking within the San Bernardino, Los Angeles counties. And in Southern California, those are the biggest spots where people are being abducted and essentially forced into human trafficking, sex trafficking, and so forth. And what really stood out to me in her presentation was she used statistics from the FBI. So again, credible information. But what really stood out is that most of females that are abducted from and forced into human trafficking are between the ages of 12 and 14. And so the student shared those statistics and then said, these aren't just random people. These are our daughters. These are our sisters. These are our nieces. These are our neighbors that are being abducted. And that really hit home to me because, as an uncle with 14, going on 14 nieces and nephews, a lot of them are in that age group. And that was really just disturbing to hear that. And that really brought me into the topic of the student's presentation. And not only did the student talk about the gravity of the situation, but also provided things that we could do as an audience member to combat this, to fight back, to right the injustices of human trafficking. So this is a very effective approach for our speeches, the startling the audience approach. So with anything, it takes a lot of practice, a lot of thought and development to be able to pull any of these off. So make sure that you're giving yourself plenty of time to work out these attention grabbers so that they can be effective. Because again, we only have one opportunity, and we don't want to blow it. Okay, the fourth is arouse curiosity. So this is essentially where we stimulate, provoke interest. We could do this by using questions or hypotheticals, or imagine you're on a far off beach, or close your eyes and think about this. Like, there's so many different creative ways we can arouse curiosity. I think using questions tends to be the most simplest form of that. And that leads us to the fifth type of attention grabber we could use, and this is question audience. So there are two types of questions we can use. There are rhetorical questions, where we simply ask the audience a question, but they're going to answer that in their minds. So we aren't actually asking the question for an answer. We just want them to quietly reflect on the answer to themselves. So that's the first type of question. The second type of question is asking the question for or asking the audience a question in order to get feedback. So if you decide to actually ask the audience a question, be sure to tell the audience how to answer that question. Do you want a verbal response? I would argue never do that, because you're going to, especially in a large audience, you're going to get 5 people trying to answer all at once, and it just doesn't work. And so if you do use a question, tell the audience how to respond. So an easy, effective way to do this is simply say, with a show of hands, how many of you ate breakfast this morning? And you should see your audience raise their hands or not. So it's essentially polling the audience. And then you could invite them, take a look around. Only 10 people out of 100 raise their hands. So that means that none of us, or a small portion of us, are actually eating breakfast, which is the most important meal of the day, right? So if you use a rhetorical question or a question where you want feedback, just inform the audience how to respond to that question. The 6, begin with quotation. And so quotes tend to be a powerful way of gaining the attention of an audience. This is, I think, overplayed a lot. So it's to a point where, okay, great. So Gandhi said this, Buddha said that, or, Jesus said that, right? So, beginning with a quote is great, but make sure it's a pretty freaking awesome quote. So you could say, in the words of Aristotle, excellence is not a habit or an act, but it's a habit. So make sure that you use a good quote. Make sure that you paraphrase and give credit to whoever stated that quote. You could also tell a story. This could be personal or hypothetical. And then the last type of attention grabber we could use is to use visual aids. This is show a picture, a graph, or an illustration. So one of my former students gave an excellent speech on sleep deprivation. And the attention grabber, she showed a brief, I think it was a 20-second video clip of a dash cam of someone falling asleep at the wheel and getting into a horrific car accident. And, she continued to say that, most of us in college are sleep deprived. In fact, research has shown that over 70% of people on college campuses are sleep deprived. And sleep deprivation and driving is almost the same as drunk driving. And so if you could imagine, like, yeah, all of us on campus, might not be driving around drunk, but because we are sleep deprived, that significantly impairs our ability to drive. And so that's why when you're driving through the parking lot, like, you've probably experienced where you've almost gotten into an accident, or someone almost ran you over while you were walking to your car, is because essentially we're all sleep deprived driving around like maniacs. And so that was her whole approach to a presentation. So she used such a scary video clip of someone getting in a car accident because they fell asleep at the wheel. And that really illustrated the gravity of the topic. Okay, so those are the attention grabbers. Make sure when you use one, you really plan it out so it becomes effective. Now, the second thing that we want to do is reveal the topic, and this is done through the purpose statement. So the second objective in a speech introduction is to communicate the general and specific purpose of a speech. So we already know what a general purpose is. You either are informing the audience or trying to persuade them, or it's some sort of special occasion in which you would communicate why you're there as a special occasion. Like, we're here today to bestow an award, or, we're here to celebrate a wedding, or we're here to mourn the loss, right? So it's the general purpose, like, why are you there? So a brief example of a general purpose would be simply say, today I'm here to inform you about things you need to know before taking a backpacking trip into the wilderness. And so you're communicating to the audience, look, I'm going to inform you on the things you need in order to go on an adventure. Now, the specific purpose is where you communicate specifically the broad theme or idea of your presentation. So specifically, I'll inform you about the gear that you need and the right type of food you need for a hiking adventure in the wilderness. So there you have it. Specifically, we're going to be talking about gear and food. The significance statement. This is the why is it important type statement. So again, you want to answer the why question. Why is this important? Why should the audience listen to you or care about the topic? So explicitly state the importance of the topic and the reasons for listening. One way you could do this is by using ethos. This is the emotional, ethos is the pathos. Actually, that's a typo. It should be pathos. Pathos is the emotional appeal to the audience. You could also use ethos, the credibility. So, citing relevant, credible sources to back up the reasons why people should listen. So this was an excerpt from my student's speech a few years ago. And this is, according to the Center of Disease, the CDC, in 2015, 73% of students are sleep deprived. As college students, this is influencing our academics, our health, and our relationships. So, if research is showing that majority of us are sleep deprived and it's influencing our academics, our health, and our relationships, yeah, you better believe that I want to know more about this topic, because I still want to get A's. I don't want to die. I want to be, in good health, and I don't want my relationships to crumble. So naturally, I'm going to be invested in this topic. Okay, so after you've communicated the purpose of your speech through the purpose statement, the next thing that we want to do is establish that credibility and goodwill. So again, after the purpose statement, the audience are going to be thinking, so why should I trust you? Or what gives you the authority to speak to me about this? And so credibility is the ethos. This is the perception of the audience whether a speaker is qualified to speak on a given topic. Now, the interesting thing about credibility is that the perception of credibility resides in the audience. That means that even though you might be a credible person or maybe an expert in your field, if you can't show that to the audience, they're going to perceive you as not having credibility at all. And so we want to make sure that we're communicating, behaving in a way that reinforces those perceptions of the audience that, yes, they can trust us. Goodwill is the perception of whether a speaker has the best interests of the audience in mind. So, think about, if you've ever been to the stereotypical used car dealership, oftentimes the salesperson is just trying to push this product, and they'll say whatever just to get you to buy the car, right? And so, most people go into that environment not trusting the sales rep or the sales person, right? And so if we are a speaker and we're coming into our speech and the audience perceives us to be manipulative or not trustworthy or not a good person, then that's going to ruin our credibility. They aren't going to pay attention to us. They won't allow themselves to be influenced by our words. And so we want to really, communicate that in the introduction. Like we're here to share the facts, share our wisdom in the pursuit of knowledge and truth. And so that's the goodwill component. So credibility is part competence and part character. So competence is how audience regards a speaker's level of intelligence, expertise, and the knowledge of the subject, right? Are they a scholar in this area? Have they done research in this area? Are they well informed? Are they communicating the topic in a sophisticated way? So competence is one part of the credibility. The second part is character, how the audience regards a speaker's sincerity, trustworthiness, concern, and well-being for the audience. So it's kind of like that old saying, practice what you preach. And so if you're trying to persuade the audience of doing something, make sure that you're a good character, a moral person who is following that recommendation. In the ancient Greek time, so I think it was it wasn't Cicero, Quintilian. Quintilian's ethics. This was a big part of Quintilian's instruction for his students: is character, be of good moral stature, right? So and this is something that even Walter Lippmann in 1922, in his book Public Opinion, he made this argument that oftentimes, people in their public life and private life are completely two different people. And what we see in the public tends to become, the general public's perception or reality of a particular person. So, think of politics now. We see a politician out on stage in the public light, behaving one way, but in their private life is completely the opposite. And as a result, their credibility is tarnished. And so if we really are concerned about credibility and having influence in the sectors of life that we are operating in, we will make sure there's congruency between the public and the private self. So what we profess in our private lives, what we hold of value, the convictions we have, we should align our public behavior along with those convictions. And so that the audience can see the congruency between them. They are sincere and trustworthy. So there are different types of credibility. There's initial credibility, and this is determined before a speech. So, we just wrapped up or early in the semester, we did the pure introduction speeches, right? And so if we are giving a keynote speaker, someone is going to probably introduce us as a speaker. They're going to probably lay down the foundations to establish that credibility. So they might say, so-and-so has a degree from here, or spent, this amount of time reading or researching this topic. They've presented here. They've been a part of that. So when we as the speaker approach the podium, chances are that credibility will have already been established. So think of it, everything we do before the speech that affects our credibility or the perceptions of our credibility. Derived credibility is determined during the speech. So during your presentation, the audience are going to probably come to your presentation with an expectation. They're going to expect you to give a great speech. And if we don't give a great speech, then credibility declines throughout the presentation. The audience leaves with a lower perception of our credibility. And then terminal credibility is determined at the end of our speech. So after our speech is done, do they walk away thinking, wow, yes, I can trust this person? Or did they walk away saying, wow, I cannot trust this person, or that content wasn't accurate, or the delivery wasn't good? So again, these are the initial derived and terminal credibility. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into the preview statement. This is the last step that you do in an introduction. And this is a statement in the introduction that identifies the main points of your body, or the main points of your speech. So example, you might say something like, I will begin my presentation with the history of the virus, then a discussion, then discuss its prevalence in North America, what vaccines and remedies are available, and what current influenza research reveals. So, this is a brief statement that's communicating to the audience. Okay, we're going to talk about the history of a virus, the prevalence of the virus, what type of attempts have been made to create vaccines and remedies, and what does current research reveal. So those are the main points in that presentation. So that's all you're going to do in the preview statement, is state in order the things you're going to be talking about. So when preparing the introduction, you want to be concise. Keep it under a minute. So your introduction doesn't need to be drawn out. It should be very succinct, very concise, and very powerful. Look for materials as you research. So when you're researching the topic, you might stumble upon a research article that really, answers that, why is this significant? So you might make a note and reference that in your introduction. Be creative, tap into your imagination, tap in the imagination of the audience. Again, as we learned in previous chapters, we want to paint a picture in the minds of the audience. So don't be afraid to grab a paintbrush and use your audience minds as a canvas. And then finalize after the body is done. So you want to, after you develop the body of your presentation, then you want to develop the introduction. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but again, keep in mind bookends. So we want to develop the body of a presentation first. Figure out what our main points are going to be, compile the information, organize it, and then it's easier to go back to the introduction and develop an introduction that is really driving towards the body of your presentation. So, you might jot down some notes for your introduction before developing the body, but you want to go back to the intro and make sure that it aligns with what you're actually going to be talking about. And then work out content and delivery in detail. So, have your introduction memorized to the point that you could recite it in your sleep. Because oftentimes, and I know we didn't quite touch on this, but with public speaking anxiety, research has found that public speaking anxiety is at its highest point in the first 30 seconds to a minute in a presentation. And, if we're experiencing speech anxiety in the first 30 seconds or minute of our presentation, we want to make sure that content is solid and we have it memorized and we can recite it, because when our physiological mechanisms start going off, when we feel hot, when we feel, the anxiety knots in our stomach, when our hands are shaking, we want to make sure that we can just deliver that introduction without having to think about it, is because chances are that's when we're going to be feeling most of the anxiety. So really focus in on the content and delivery in detail. And if you can make it past the introduction, again, the cortisol levels, the stress or the anxiety people experience usually tapers off, and it's at its lowest towards the conclusion of a presentation. So get through the introduction. This will help you overcome some of that public speaking anxiety. Okay, talking about the conclusion, let's briefly discuss the purpose and objectives of occlusion. Well, the conclusion signals the end of a speech. So again, it signals to the audience like, okay, I'm wrapping up, I'm ending my presentation, and it should reinforce the central idea. Now, there are two types of conclusions. We could use a crescendo ending, which is building in power and intensity, and then just ending that presentation, like kind of like in the movies, the motivational speeches, and they end on a powerful note, and everyone's like, yeah. Okay, so that is the crescendo type, just loud, powerful, intense conclusion. Typically, this is good for motivating, inspiring the audience. So, maybe we do this with our informatives, with our persuasive speeches. But we could use a dissolve ending, and this is generating emotional appeal by fading to dramatic final statements. So dissolving an ending leaves the audience with more of a somber, dramatic emotion. So one of my students gave a speech about banning plastic straws, and this was a few years ago too. And the student showed a disturbing photograph of a sea turtle with a plastic straw shoved in its eyeball, and the sea turtle was rescued, and vets were trying to surgically remove this plastic straw. I think it was a green straw, so that's probably from Starbucks, when Starbucks had plastic straws. But essentially, the student was trying to persuade us to ban plastic straws. Don't use plastic straws in our everyday life, because this is what it's doing to the wildlife. And so towards the end of the presentation, the student referred back to the introduction with that visual and dissolved the ending and said, one small change in your behavior could mean life or death for a sea turtle. And just like let it really sink into the audience. And after that day, I went and got some iced coffee, and I decided, no, I don't need a straw. I'll just drink it out of the cup. So those are the types of endings. So the conclusion really is to reinforce the central idea. So we want to summarize the speech, summarize the main points, and we could refer back to the attention grabber on how to end our presentation. So we could use with a question, again, that rhetorical question. We could make another dramatic statement, and we could refer to the intro. We could do all sorts of different things to conclude our presentation. So when preparing the conclusion, look for materials while researching. Once again, conclude with a bang, not a whimper. And so, oftentimes when students or people don't spend enough time developing their conclusion, they get to the end of their presentation, they don't know how to end, and so they simply state, that's it, I'm done. That is the worst thing that you could say. In fact, that is my biggest pet peeve. So towards the end of your presentation, for the sake of all that is good in humanity and in this world, never, 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 never say, that's it, I'm done. Like, if you get to an end of your presentation, you don't know how to end it, like, the bare minimum you could do is simply say, thank you so much for paying attention to what I had to share with you today. A simple thank you is a million times better than saying, that's it, I'm done, and walking off stage. So conclude with a bang. I hope my passion for this has really communicated to you my absolute distaste for that statement of, that's it, I'm done. Again, simply say thank you, and with a quote, be creative. But again, you don't want to draw out the conclusion. Be brief. Work out the content, the delivery in detail, so that when you get to the conclusion, you can recite it and it has maximum impact on the audience. And so in this chapter, we talked about the 4 objectives of a speech introduction, methods for gaining audience attention, functions of the speech conclusion, and the methods for conclusion. That's it. I'm done. No, I'm just kidding. So at this point in the semester, you know how to develop your ideas, you know how to research, you know how to structure the body of your presentation, and now you know what are effective introductions and conclusions. So, like always, if there's anything I can help you with, please reach out to me, and have a great day, and we'll see you next time. That's it. I'm done.